Welcome to the Conscious Experience. My name is Boris Kerjner. So excited to welcome you here for another episode of transformational insights, perspectives, and how-tos in navigating this life consciously. Today, I'm with my brother, Mike. Mike, what are we up to?
We are going to talk today about triggers, probably specifically emotional triggers, not gun triggers or what other kind of triggers are there?
Yeah, amazing. So triggers is something that I think all of us experience on a daily basis. And it seems like we're becoming more and more of this trigger happy society and culture. And again, not necessarily gun triggers, but be getting upset and trying to create a kind of world where we're not getting so upset by various ways that we're trying to outlaw things that might upset us.
Okay, let's start with definitions. So what does trigger mean, or what does it mean to be triggered?
Yeah, to be triggered is very interesting, right? Because you can be sitting on the couch with your friend or with your lover, and it's just like everything's fine. You're having a great thing. And then you ask one question, and then boom, and the entire energy changes, and you're now in a completely different constellation. It was a beautiful like date evening or whatever. And then suddenly, whoa. And what I would say is that experience, it's almost as if we have entered into a psychedelic state. It's a shift in consciousness. So you go from your present moment, adult, let's say consciousness, whatever your present age is, that level of maturity is typically here. And for most of us in our conscious kind of everyday experience, we go from here into a deep regression, oftentimes all the way back to childhood, where we suddenly lose all of our capacity to negotiate, to understand, to be patient, to take a breath. We forget, and we go back to something very, very primitive and very, very reactive. And so that experience is what I would say, is encompassing this whole term of trigger.
I like the word that you used. You said go back. And when I typed in trigger into the etymology.com, their definition was cause, in brackets, something to happen. And you might be like, okay, yeah, cause something to happen. That's what a trigger is. But then we have to think of like, what is the cause for something to happen? You know, like what is
Right.
that? The Buddhists call this like samskaras, right? These deep rooted beliefs, which when are challenged or, yeah,
Or
basically
even
when
just
are challenged.
resonated, right? Like it's
Yeah,
not
when
necessarily.
vibrated.
Yeah, I kind of also think about it. There's a principle in physics called, and just in energy called natural resonance. So like when you see the opera singer sing to a glass and then it shatters, you've seen that, right? They always first tap the glass, and they tap and they listen. They're listening for how the glass sings on its own, and then they try to match that with their voice. And the reason why there's that energy transfer from the voice to the glass is because there's a match in resonance, a match in frequency. And so energy gets transferred. So it's very similar. It's like there could be even a picture of something. There could be a certain word that is said that is not at you, has nothing to do with you. You're walking by and suddenly you see and then click. And it's the same kind of experience. You are now in a different kind of state.
We'll start talking about like why people get triggered and stuff like that, but now we're talking at a very high level. So I like what you're talking about, which is it's really just energy and vibration, right? And when we
Yes.
look at like again the definition, the cause of something to happen, it's like if we go all the way back again, if we believe in science, which I do to some degree, the Big Bang, right? That was the initial cause. That was the
Mm.
initial trigger for something to happen, which is the universe unfolding. So we'll talk about why triggers are quote unquote not the best thing in the world, but at the same time, we have a reason why they're here, right? This is a divine play of triggers literally unfolding. The cause, the fate is already set in motion from the initial spark.
Yeah. Yeah, but so what is actually happening? I kind of would like to zoom into it. Like that moment, yes, we seem to be regressing. Yes, there is like this uncontrolled emotional experience. But in that grander scheme that you're talking about, like what is really happening? Like what is the grand design, like the divine design behind us experiencing this? Yeah.
Good question. I almost visualize it like a God's initial like word is like shaking and moving reality, and everything needs to be kind of ruffled in order to kind of like awaken. And so I would say the point of triggers, if that was the question, I don't know if that was the question, is to wake you up and to move you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, my question was like, what is actually happening? And it is kind of like this. It's like, the way I sometimes look at life is that we're here in this school where we're learning to be unconditionally loving, unconditionally peaceful, unconditionally loving, unconditionally joyful. Why? Because this is actually our own inherent nature. It's just, God is not this like depressed, divided, being, right? So it's almost as if like our experience here is one where we get to represence our original nature in manifestation. Like, the term heaven on earth, right? The new earth, this idea, this golden age idea that we will become the divine human. And I really feel that this experience of trigger is at the core of our journey into these heightened states of awareness, self-awareness. It's almost as if like that's an opportunity. It's this like moment by moment micro opportunity to either open in love. It's like you're challenged. What are you going to do? You're squeezed. What are you going to do? And most of the time we have no awareness of this. And so we react, we fight, we resist. But I think that in that divine sense of purpose, I feel like this is just like an invitation. Like, will you love me even though I resonate with this like painful spot in you?
Beautiful. Like an opportunity to expand, because really triggers make you contracted, right? That's interesting.
Yes.
So let's move around a little bit. Let's talk about what are some signs that you're triggered, and we can give some examples, like maybe what emotional triggers are universal across all humans. Like,
well, those are two, I think, really good questions. Like there are maybe triggers that are universal. We can touch in there too. But it's like you were saying, what are some of the signs? And this is actually a really, I think, potent exploration, because if we can become aware of even those physiological signs of being triggered, it's almost like getting triggered is almost also like falling asleep. It's like you had like this vast space of like life, and you're talking about this subject and that, and you're in the flow and everything's beautiful, and then suddenly everything is very small, and like the focus gets very small, very narrow, and it's just like, now this reality. Do you agree with me or not? Are you like with us or against us? And that becomes suddenly all consuming from this infinite opening to. So it's important to notice that we have like essentially fallen asleep into a very myopic view, myopic dream, and reality is still coming through to us through that dream, but it's deeply distorted. It's almost like, sometimes, have you had this experience? I definitely have like read about it, and I think I have. It's experience where this waking stimuli come into our nightly dreams, right? Like, for example, somebody turns on the lights, and in your dream, it seems like, oh, the night just turned into day, or like the sun is rising, or there's a train coming at you, or whatever it is. So there's this real world stimuli that gets distorted and converted, even though reality is kind of like reaching you, but it's reaching you through this path that is shaped by your dream. So you're not seeing it as it is. You are seeing it through the lens of the dream. And it's the same thing with triggers. Suddenly you fall into it and you see everything through this one lens, and there may be lights turning on, and it's like, and it's reminding you of something, and that's maybe even touching into that space of PTSD, right? PTSD is like when you have this stimulus, like lights turning on, and it reminds you of the bomb flash, and you're suddenly back there again. So let's tune in for a second to those physiological, like, how can you recognize, what are the signs that we can recognize that we are now in a trigger state?
Well, yeah, that is one sign. Like you said, it's like your perspective goes from like illuminated and bright and expansive to very dim and contracted. So I like that. Physiologically, you guys can watch the video that we did on anxiety and conflict. Those two will be very related to this. And I think that one, I notice probably when I'm triggered, my heartbeat starts to beat a little bit faster and my breath gets a little bit more shallow.
Yes.
Those are two signs. Yeah.
Yeah, breath, I think is the one, and yeah, breath and this pulse, this heart rate. I don't, can you hear that? There's thunder happening outside.
On the beach.
Um, yeah. So breath and heart rate, and then also you may notice like your palms might get more clammy, you might feel more tense. Just becoming aware of these physiological signs, and then actually maybe even engaging them, such as, your breath becomes really short and you open it up. That is part of you now coming into greater awareness. Now you're like, okay, so I was triggered, and hold on, now let me expand in the face of this contraction. Let me remember, let me awaken, let me become more aware of what is happening right now, instead of less aware and really convinced into my story. It's like, oh, I notice I am in a trigger. That means I'm not actually thinking in my highest capacity. I'm not thinking rightly. My perception is not pure. I know what triggers do to me. So, okay, let me suspend judgment here for a second. Let me just, yeah, yeah,
Mm. I mean, you gave the viewers a shortcut there, suspend judgment. Maybe we can touch in on that a little bit later too. Um, so are there any other signs that you can think of being triggered? I'm just trying to put myself in that situation. It's been a while, at least I think that one of the biggest triggers for me personally is relationship triggers.
yes,
Business triggers, not so much, but yeah.
yeah.
Any other signs or?
I mean, some of the other signs are like more psychological. Like if you find yourself defending and really being like invested into a particular outcome, like I need her to like say this word to me, or, I need, to hear that, an apology or this or that. Or I just need to convince you and teach you and give you all of this, information to prove that, that when we see ourselves making that effort and that sense of like, oh, and we're trying to, that is a really good sign that we're in a trigger and we are acting on behalf of this trigger. This is something really cool that Eckhart Tolle touched in on many, many years ago, just saying that essentially our ego has this sense of like needing to be right. And if it's not right, if it's proven to be not right, it like shakes its core of like its reality. If I'm not right in this, then maybe I'm not right or real, in other ways. So there's that like impulse, and just for us to notice, like, actually, it doesn't matter if this person says, whatever, maybe they believe more in another political slant or whatever it may be. Okay, well, what is that to me?
Mm-hmm. Where do you think triggers come from? Are they traumas like we mentioned earlier, samskaras? And then why do you think some people trigger us?
Yeah. Well, triggers, I would say, primarily come from, okay, triggers come 100% from the past. It just is a matter of how far in the past they come from. And I would say that most of our triggers really come from that very, very young age, between 0 and 7 years old, where we essentially just have this pure like reactivity. There's no gap for us to really decide, well, this person said that to me, but they were just upset with themselves, and they just had a losing day, and so it's not really about me. We don't have any of that capacity, so it literally everything becomes about us. uh when we're in that state, we really pick up a lot of these structures and even triggers from our family. This is when we say kind of like this generational curses or something, these generational like nemesis and enemies and things like this. Happens often in kind of like very patriotic or even like religious kind of contexts, where it's like, oh yeah, I know it's like this, this is right and this is wrong. So, but it's beyond this. I would say, like, some of our deepest triggers are those triggers of shame, those triggers where we're felt like we're not that good boy or good girl that we've been striving so hard to be. And that could be like, again, like you mentioned in another episode, like our mom is just not responding to us for whatever reason, or we are chastised at school for something that we're wearing or have said, and then boom, this contraction, the sense of abandonment, this tribal sense, like shame, abandonment, this tribal sense of inclusion is so important in our like first chakra kind of primitive consciousness, which is where we're growing through when we're first born. So I really feel that this is this is the core of where triggers are coming from. It's like these unmet moments. Unmet what? Unmet call for love. Like this sense that for whatever reason, and see, it's kind of all comes back to this love game. It's like, well, for whatever reason, I'm just not lovable, and crack, and then from that moment on, whatever resonates with that crack, we experience as a trigger.
Nice. Agreed. That's amazing. How do you keep from being triggered? So this is like more of a prevention thing, and then later we'll talk about what to do when you're actually triggered. So is there anything that we can do to prevent triggers from happening?
Do we want to?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Like, it really depends on your, I'll say a couple of things. In general, we don't want to purely just avoid triggers and try not to have them, and try to, like, basically that would be called like resistance, whether we're psychologically trying to like manipulate something so that I'm not triggered. It's like, and when that arises, you're going to feel even more like a failure. You're going to feel like, oh, it didn't work out. That setup is a setup for you to resist, and what you resist persists. So for the most part, we don't want to have this attitude of like, I want to get rid of triggers. I want to avoid them. I want to never experience them. Instead, we really want to get resourceful. And this is that second part, is like, there'll be moments in our life when we are not so resourced. There could be like a trigger that comes up late at night, or in the middle of a party, maybe like your friends or your partner like has had a drink or something, or you may have had a drink, or whatever state you're in. And then suddenly you just notice like, oh man, this is a messy experience. Like, we can handle this much better if we have a sleep, we wake up in the morning, and we resource ourselves, and then we focus on this conversation. That may be a time when you have this awareness to just say, okay, I see this is really important. It's important to me too. Let's bookmark this, and we will come back to this tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. That is a really good time and a very wise way to navigate a trigger, so that you're not re-traumatizing, you're not going into a fight. But otherwise, I think the real juice is in knowing how to meet triggers resourcefully, skillfully.
Nice. As you were talking, I was thinking maybe we can explore this. What's the difference between a trigger, which is traditionally looked at as slanted, like bad, not so good, versus a red flag, which people would be like, oh yeah, that's something that is like alarming to me. It's also like a warning sign, but more so used in a positive slant of like, okay, this is a red flag, I'm gonna do something different.
Yeah, perhaps that comes back to the earlier question that you kind of posed for us, was are there some things that are universal? Because if there are universal triggers, then, I would say that those maybe are red flags. It's like, wait, like I have signs of mold in my house. Oh, shoot. Like, that's not good. Universally, we don't want to live with mold in our house. Okay. Like, so that's a red flag. If I'm trying to move in here, if I'm like thinking about this property or whatever, I would say like that, but that's not necessarily emotional. We may react emotionally to it, like, oh no, I don't want this, instead of just like, okay, no thanks, this isn't for us. But red flags, I would say, is like this kind of recognition of something that is more more universally considered as not good for us. Whereas triggers, on the other hand, are very personal. Very, very personal to.
Well, let's use a very common one. So, like a narcissist, for example. So you're in a relationship with a narcissist, whatever that means. Now, how do you know if that's a red flag versus just your trigger?
I would say, like, in my personal experience, I would say that that narcissist experience is like a judgment of character, right? And you are totally free to choose who you are with, based on your evaluation of like what kind of person you'd like, what values you want them to have. And that is a beautiful and very valid way to kind of navigate relationship. But what if we really break down the experience, like what is narcissism and what is this space? Because I think narcissist is something that doesn't exist. I think that there's narcissistic traits, and I think we actually universally, my belief through my own exploration also, is that we as human beings possess every single trait that exists in the spectrum of humanity. It lives in us and we in it, and we can resurrect any state within our experience. And sometimes we do so unconsciously, and sometimes we get stuck in states. And then we may say, oh, this person is a narcissist because they're stuck in a state where they're not willing to look, let's say, within and say, okay, maybe there's some things I need to change. Maybe I need to, apologize or something like this. And we always say, no, it's clearly it's you because I'm, whatever. But I think that these are all traits and emerging qualities. And I'm always very curious in the sense of like, if I have this narcissistic appearance in my experience, I'll say, well, this is my experience. And if I'm reacting to this, if I'm labeling it and judging it and experiencing it as something, then it is something for me. It's like my own trigger. So it's really coming back to my experience. I do believe that, there's people who maybe don't have your best interests in heart, and you don't have to be with them. But I wouldn't position that like as, oh, I'm not being with them because they're a narcissist. I would be like, I'm not being with them because these certain needs are not being met, and I have these kind of needs in a relationship, and I'm not getting those. That is fully valid. And the other one is a way where we are, again, taking our trigger and instead of really looking at it, because that narcissist is triggering something in you that is actually yearning for exploration. It is a place where, because somebody is appearing a particular way in front of you, your heart closes. I would say that this is another big symptom of what a trigger is. Maybe it's in fact the substance of it, is that our heart closes. As it is like what you said, this contraction. It's like heart wall. And that is an opportunity for us once again to continue towards our enlightenment, to really continue towards our natural state of unconditional love and say, okay, well, what is that about me? Meanwhile, of course, keeping ourselves safe if we're in any kind of harm's way.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's a very common situation that people find themselves in. Whether things are red flags, meaning that you should kind of move away, or whether it's something for you to explore. And like I said, it's a thin veil, which probably means that you should explore a little bit of both sides.
And I think it could be different for different people, right? Like somebody may be in a position where it's like, I bet, like, let's say that there's a guy who's like this narcissist, right? And this woman who is dating him, and maybe another woman is in love with him. And then it's like, oh, but like to that one, it feels like a match. And to this one, it feels like not, right? So it's like, this is why, coming back to that space, like the triggers that we have, the judgments that we have are from our past, our unique past. Yes, we have commonality with all humanity. There are certain common aspects to all human experience as we move through life. And so there is some shared experience, but the uniqueness of triggers is like this sense that it's personal. Oh, this person is, that way at me. No, they're not. They are that way themselves. And you can enjoy that or not, and be next to that or not, but they are. It's just like a tiger, right? If you come to the tiger and the tiger is like swiping at you and you're like, well, why me? What did I do to you? No, you didn't do anything. It's not about you. It is literally about the tiger's own nature.
Yeah, I think in the previous episode on conflict, you had mentioned something like the true test is, are you at peace? So yes, you can notice a red flag, but you should notice it from a place of peace rather than agitation, because if it's agitation, it's likely something that is probably within you that needs to be looked at. So what are some other ways that people can remedy or deal with once they are triggered? Like, how do they use certain techniques, maybe mentally or physiologically? Like you had mentioned, non-judging is one of them. What other ones?
Yeah. So I think the very first step one is to have the context for triggers. Like if you don't have this context that we can maybe again summarize here, but we've been talking about it, then it won't make sense for you. Then all you're going to want to do is get rid of it, which is a form of resistance, blame the other person, or walk away from it and try to avoid it. So to not engage any of those energies, which are not in themselves leading you to unconditional love, to your heart opening, to you feeling deeply resourced in a way that is unconditionally peaceful, that your peace and your love and your sense of joy doesn't come from this other person and their behavior for that split moment. It comes from something deep, deep, deep within that never stops. So the context then is, when we experience triggers, it is an opportunity for us to level up in love. Okay, that I would maybe just say just like this. It's an opportunity to level up in love. And the way that you will know that you've leveled up in love is that sense that you may have experienced a momentary contraction, but you found a way. It doesn't have to be instant. It doesn't have to be instant like everything forgiven and blah, 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 blah. No, it could be through conversation. It could be through vulnerable sharing. It could be through crying afterwards. It could be through actually you're not even solving it that day and like having an experience where you maybe like in turmoil for a little bit and you maybe get to journal about it. And then somehow, some way, sometime an insight arises, but you do not kind of like close the door on the trigger. You are open and sensitive to it. And what I would say also, another really core anchor of this is to look at your triggers like they are children, like they are young versions of you. Like imagine that it's like a little version of you is just like, he said this to me, and is talking to you almost like a parent, and then this and this, and it doesn't love me. And you say, oh, okay, it's okay. I got you. You don't tell it, okay, I'm going to listen to you and hope you go away. I can't wait until you disappear. I want you to get away from me. That is not going to help that little one to integrate. It's actually not going to help you to have freedom either, because you're going to experience a lot of pain and hurt in that reflection. So we really want to be available to listen and to hear the trigger and know that as we're doing this, but we're not doing it to liberate it, but as we are sincerely with it, we do liberate it. We do, so to speak, take that regression that we just experienced, that younger version of ourselves, which is still within us, and we, through our compassion, through our presence with it, just through our awareness, not through our non-resistance, over time, it melts back into the whole. It's like the wave returns to the ocean, and you become it, and it becomes you. And now it's no longer a trigger. Now it is something more integral, something more that's got that piece of my soul, that piece of my heart back. And I'm now able to love more with that. So
Yes.
I would say that this is first, like, right? This is the context.
Yeah, I like all the different configurations you gave the audience to yeah, it can come in like immediate conversation to deal with the trigger, but most likely I would say, based on my experience, I don't know about you, but when you are deeply triggered and it was kind of like blindsight to you, and you're just so emotionally charged, for me, one of the best things to do is take space for a short period of time. Like space for what? Not space to abandon my child, because again, I just want to clarify, Boris was not talking about your inner child as the other person that you and so you're not leaving them in that sense. You're taking space to be with your own inner child. And I think
Yes.
there's is like that meditation of literally like what you were talking about. It's like holding yourself as a child, seeing yourself triggered. I think that's a very powerful thing. But yeah, typically, I don't know about you, but I take space for a short period of time and then allow it to resolve itself within me before speaking to the other person. Because I don't think you can
Yes.
speak to the other person clearly without removing that
Yes.
energy.
I think it depends also on how deep you fall into the trigger, because I believe that we really have different levels of trigger or different levels of intensity. So it could be that you have a trigger, but right in that same moment, there's still awareness, there's still luminosity, and you are kind of like, okay, in that moment, the way that I would really encourage to explore moving through a trigger is through what I would say vulnerability. So it's like you, ooh, oh gosh, okay, I feel that. I feel okay. And then you share with the other person, when you said that, I had this all of a sudden this crazy experience where like just everything collapsed inside of me, and now I'm feeling kind of more distant from you, and I'm just breathing with it, and I'm just listening to what's happening. And that way of like revealing yourself in a moment, I want to just share that you're not doing that for the other person. You are doing that on behalf of this inner child space. When you think about when we were younger and how our parents, most parents, I would say, would treat a crying, demanding child, right? It's like they would say, don't do this in public. You don't, and it's just kind of this shut down, be quiet, don't cry. All of that is this. And what you are doing instead is you're saying, I'm going to speak on your behalf. What are you saying? Yeah, okay. And then you presence that feeling, that intention, that awareness. As you do that, that is also the magical alchemy that happens, because you have now reversed, for the first time perhaps, polarity for that little one, which has always been rejected for its cry and its demand for love. And you say, through your acknowledgement, you give it that love. You say, okay, yeah. So that is another really potent one. And it doesn't even have to be that the other person has skills to handle it. You literally can just like speak this on behalf of yourself, ask for space, ask for a moment. But I would really encourage, and this is some like next level ninja emotional intelligence, but I would really encourage us to be truthful and aware of what is happening inside, instead of what typically happens in social interactions is that I get triggered and I pretend like I'm not. Like I pretend that so that you don't see that I'm triggered, and we continue talking. Everybody freaking knows that there's something that went down, because like there is a shift in energy. Now you're like hanging out in this dead space and you're like pretending like it's okay that you're exploring this, but overall that is not going to liberate this energy. And sometimes we fall into that space. Even I still fall into the space and like, oh, nothing's wrong.
That is a powerful, I think a lot of people can resonate with that space of like, yeah, nothing is wrong sitting there. But you had said something, and that's not anything bad. Again, that's just them wanting to take space but not communicating it very clearly. But
Yes.
yeah, taking it that step up or further is like, be transparent and vulnerable, or at least practice it as much as you can. Try to use words that help open up rather than shut down, and then go ahead and take that space. But you have to be honest with yourself and the person who has triggered you. So that's awesome. Let's give our audience some examples. So what are some emotional triggers that this is the common, I guess, core question. What are some emotional triggers that make us lose money?
Yeah. This is interesting, right? To think about the ways that we allow triggers to be something that makes decisions for us. I would say that's probably at the core of that question, is that we experience an emotional trigger, and then we say, it may be like your business partner didn't respond to an idea that you sent them, and then you remind them, and then they didn't respond, and you don't know, like maybe that for that person it's like they had a relationship blow up that day, and
The
then
queen died.
Yeah, the queen died or whatever happened. But you make it about you, and then you are like, you know what, this person doesn't value me, I'm not going to pursue this anymore, and you cut your opportunities, right? You cut your ties, your network, your relationships, just because you have this glint of the past kind of like souring your perception. So to avoid this, you actually just like, this is the most important thing, is the simplest thing in the world. And I know it's very difficult for all of us as humans, is that we talk. We actually ask the questions. We just say like, hey, like I reached out to you a couple of times and you didn't respond. And it kind of seemed to me like maybe you're just ignoring me. And I just want to check in with you. Like, was that what's going on? Because if you're not interested, it's cool. I'd just love to hear from you. That kind of conversation is very rare still in our world. And I really would want to encourage us to say, okay, there's nothing wrong with asking. I know that a part of us is like steaming in shame, right? This like, oh, maybe it's this fear of rejection, basically. It's like, oh, if I reach out, what if I'm even more rejected? Maybe I should reject them first. And this is a very core ego strategy. I've seen it play out in my relationships. I've seen it play out in many different other moments, even like jobs and stuff in my past, where it's like, I will not be abandoned. I will abandon you first. And that is just a common defense. And we don't really get to see that. To us, it always seems like the other person is the one who's like judging us or not accepting us. But really, we get this impression and then we cut it. And that is a loss of opportunity for us.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, further to that, like, because again, the good question is like, what makes us lose money? I think a lot of the things around money are around fear and like scarcity. And so we get triggered whenever something happens, whether it's like in the stock market, whatever financial market, that causes us to like tighten and constrict ourselves. And then we act from that place of, again, scarcity and fear, which there's absolutely no abundance in that. So,
yeah. So this is really important. I just want to highlight what you said is so powerful. It's like, what is the reason for our action? Like, what are we proving with our action? Are we proving fear? Are we proving lack? Or are we proving that peace that passes all understanding, and just reaching through the fire and saying, you know what, you're my brother. And if you don't want me around, that's up to you. But I'm going to reach out and I'm going to say to you, what's on my heart. So it's that kind of also responsibility. And reminds me of that beautiful Rumi quote. It always comes back to me. It's like, move, but don't move the way that fear makes you move. because in your moving with fear, it's just like faith without works is dead. This is a scriptural term. So is fear without works. It's also dead. But if you do the works of fear, you will prove fear, and feel fear would look real to you in your experience.
It reminds me of, again, we use so many video game analogies, but imagine you're like playing an RPG game and it's all like divinely written already, let's say, and you're ping-ponging basically, your character's moving and it's like, boom, there's gonna be a trigger. You can think of it like a quest or a trap or something like that. Whatever it is, like trigger, boing, boing, boing. So that quote is like, do not move by fear, which is how the video game character typically moves. It's like move by inspiration. You know, you want to go to that next quest. You want to be like bounced around to these different things, right? So it's just a shift in perspective. Because again, triggers they're divinely there for you to basically move. It's there to move and shake you throughout this experience.
Yeah. I also want to just say, like, that is, I almost sometimes feel like it's the very core of life, is just how we meet those moments when we are squeezed. Like, I remember Grandpa Wayne Dyer, right, talking about this. Like, when you squeeze an orange, what comes out? Orange juice, right? When you squeeze a lemon, what comes out? Lemon
It's
juice.
Uncle.
Oh, I kind of feel like he's Grandpa now. But when you squeeze you, what comes out? And if what comes out is this like fear and shame and guilt and defensiveness, that was in you. The trigger is helping to pull it out. It's that surgery that's happening. It's opening your heart, and you're like fighting it, and you're trying to get rid of it. It's okay as long as we don't have this realization. But as we begin to realize this, we realize this is a blessing. This is grace. It's fierce grace, but it's grace, and it's liberating us.
Yeah, language is so powerful, right? It's like, let's say, like, even the fact that we know what the word trigger is, it's like when we're in a relationship, you know this, I'm sure, it's like, oh, you're triggered. No, you're triggered. You're triggered. It's like, if we were just to change the word to quest, it's like, no, you've been set on a quest. Now you
Yeah.
have a purpose and a reason to move through it, not just like trigger.
Yeah. I believe it's Michael Brown who wrote the book. It's called something like Presence. Practice of presence or something like this. Basically, what he said is that it's every trigger is a setup by the Holy Spirit. It's set up, and he calls the Holy Spirit like maybe the presence. The presence is setting you up for all of these opportunities. And so it's like, if you really can get on the side of the fact that life and universe and everything is friendly and everything is conspiring for your good, for your awakening, and you can move with it. Like the Tao, you're moving with it. You're not like fighting and resisting and trying to say, no, I'm right. I know how life should be. I know how this moment should be. I know how this person should be. I know everything. It's all of this that doesn't know. And instead you find some humility and you say, wait a second, really? Is that absolutely true? And you find this openness and you say, okay, if this is appearing, okay, I will move with it. I will Aikido with this one now, because that's what's in front of me.
Beautiful. Aikido, shout out Andrew Tate. Is there anything else you want to cover? I feel like we covered a very broad spectrum, which is amazing, and I like the perspectives that you brought into this already. So,
yeah, I mean, let's change the culture around triggers. Let's be a culture where it's like somebody's triggered, we applaud them. We're like, yes,
woo!
There's a moment of enlightenment about to unfold, and we hold that for each other. We hold that for ourselves. Humor also is really important. It's like, if we can bring humor to these moments of trigger, you will realize, like, if you could only have this like third eye perspective, third person perspective on like what's happening, because oftentimes you see like a couple sitting on the couch. That couple is often myself and my wife. Everything's fine. And then one moment, boom. And it's like, can you imagine animals? Like we watch, like, for example, like, I don't know, two like otters swimming around holding hands. And then all of a sudden they're just like, boom, boom, boom. And they're whacking themselves, each other with their tails. And it's like, what happened? Really? Like, and it's not, I don't think we see this as often with animals as we do with humans. And maybe we don't actually physically engage in this way, but psychically and emotionally, there's this all of a sudden this turmoil. And so I would love to just call us to this different way of approaching it and saying, wow, okay, just like some blessing just dropped in. And if we just carefully intentionally breathe through this, and try to find each other through the fire, through the mist. Oh, wow. We are moving towards unconditional love together as a couple, as friendship, as a community, as the unity of humanity. That's what I would love to, to call forth and to live together.
I love you guys. Yeah. So embark on those quests or triggers and find those gems or Easter eggs, and they're full of amazing surprises.
Yeah. They return your life force back to you, your love, your heart, if there's this idea in shamanism of the soul retrieval, the fragmented soul, we are pulling all of that back in those moments where we meet triggers with consciousness, with awareness.
Yeehaw! I love it. Awesome, guys. Make sure you leave us a comment. What kind of triggers do you guys have? What kind of triggers are you working through? Hopefully this has been helpful for you. And I guess we'll see you guys next time.
Like, subscribe, and let us know what other topics interest you. Super grateful that we get this opportunity to grow and evolve together.
Amen. All right. See you next time, guys. Take care.